May 26, 2016, West Hollywood. When police officers forced their way through the barricaded apartment door, they expected to find a missing woman. What they discovered instead would haunt even the most seasoned investigators for years to come. Inside the master bedroom lay Blake Leibel, heir to a multi-million-dollar Canadian fortune, calmly positioned beside the mutilated body of his fiancée, Iana Kasian. The 30-year-old Ukrainian mother had been scalped. Her blood had been completely drained from her body. According to the coroner, she had been alive and conscious for most of the 8-hour torture session that killed her. But here's what made this case even more chilling. Investigators would soon discover that Blake had written the perfect blueprint for this murder years before he committed it. In a graphic novel that depicted the exact same horrific methods, he used to kill the mother of his 3-week-old daughter. This is the horrifying truth behind Hollywood's most calculated killing, and the blueprint for murder that turned fiction into deadly reality. Welcome to the True Crime Evidence Files. Tonight's case will shake you to your core. Take a moment to hit subscribe, drop a like, and please let us know where you're watching from. And now we begin. To understand this horror, we need to step back into the world of 2016 Hollywood, a time when the American dream still glittered with promise, but darkness lurked beneath the surface. This was the peak of social media obsession, where image was everything and reality could be carefully curated with the right filter. Instagram influencers were reshaping fame, and everyone wanted their slice of Hollywood glamour. It was also the golden age of graphic novels and comic culture. What was once considered niche had exploded into mainstream entertainment, with adaptations dominating box offices worldwide. West Hollywood in 2016 was a study in contrasts. By day, it sparkled with luxury boutiques, trendy cafes, and million-dollar condominiums. By night, it revealed its darker nature, a playground for the wealthy where money could buy silence, access, and protection from consequence. This was preemie too. Powerful men with deep pockets operated with virtual impunity. For immigrants like Iana Kasian, America represented the ultimate dream of reinvention and opportunity. The promise that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle seemed within reach in this land of endless possibility. Holloway Drive, where our story unfolds, epitomized this duality. Behind the pristine facades of luxury condominiums lived people whose wealth had insulated them from accountability. Here, Canadian real estate fortunes met Hollywood ambition, creating a toxic environment where privilege collided with vulnerability. It was a time when trust fund kids could buy their way into any industry, when graphic violence in entertainment was celebrated as artistic expression, and when true crime was becoming America's newest obsession. The very culture that would later dissect Blake Leibel's crimes was, in many ways, the same culture that had created the perfect conditions for them to occur. This was the world that would witness one of the most brutal murders in Los Angeles history. Iana Kasian was born on January 27, 1986, in Kyiv, Ukraine, a city that in the 1980s was still part of the Soviet Union, where opportunity was scarce and the future uncertain. From an early age, Iana displayed the determination that would define her life. She excelled in her studies, mastered multiple languages, and pursued a law degree with fierce dedication. After graduation, Iana became a prosecutor specializing in tax crimes for the Ukrainian government, a position that required courage, as she was tasked with investigating corruption in a system where whistleblowers often faced serious consequences. Those who knew her described a woman who refused to be intimidated, someone who believed deeply in justice and wasn't afraid to fight for what was right. But Iana had bigger dreams. In 2014, at age 28, she made the brave decision to immigrate to the United States. Like millions before her, she saw America as a land where hard work and talent could overcome any obstacle, where she could build the life she'd always envisioned. The transition wasn't easy. Despite her law degree and prosecutorial experience, Iana had to start over in California. She worked as a model and translator while perfecting her English, taking on whatever work she could find to establish herself. Friends remember her as incredibly intelligent and ambitious, but also kind and generous, the type of person who would go out of her way to help others. Iana maintained an extraordinarily close relationship with her mother, Olga. They spoke every single day, sharing dreams, fears, and plans for the future. Iana's greatest aspiration was to raise a family in what she called this huge, strong country, to give her future children the opportunities and security that had been denied to her generation in Ukraine. In 2015, her life took a dramatic turn when she met Blake Leibel. He was everything she thought she wanted: wealthy, charming, and seemingly successful in the entertainment industry. Blake was still married to model Amanda Braun, who was pregnant with their second child, but he told Iana his marriage was over. What Iana saw as a fairy tale romance was actually a carefully orchestrated deception. Blake showered her with gifts, expensive cars, luxury accommodations, promises of marriage, and a shared future. When Iana became pregnant in late 2015, she was overjoyed. This was the family she dreamed of, the American dream finally within reach. But red flags emerged quickly after their daughter, Diana, was born on May 3, 2016. Blake, who had seemed excited about becoming a father, immediately became jealous of the attention Iana gave their newborn. In a shocking display of control, he forced Iana to send 3-week-old Diana to live with her grandmother, Olga, in a separate apartment that he paid for. Jana was still recovering from her C-section when Blake began making increasingly unreasonable demands. He insisted on constant sexual availability and threatened to leave her for other women if she didn't comply. As his legal troubles mounted, he had recently been arrested for sexually assaulting another girlfriend. His control over Iana intensified in those final weeks. Friends noticed Iana seemed different. The confident, ambitious woman who had conquered language barriers and built a new life from nothing appeared frightened and isolated. She had nowhere to turn, no family nearby, limited financial resources, and a 3-week-old daughter whose future depended entirely on Blake's continued support. She was trapped, and Blake knew it. Blake Leibel was born into a world where money solved every problem and privilege opened every door. Born May 8, 1981, he was the son of Lauren Leibel, a Toronto real estate magnate who built over 30,000 homes and amassed a fortune that placed the family among Canada's elite. His mother's side brought even more wealth, the All-Rose Products plastics empire worth millions. Growing up in Toronto's most expensive neighborhoods, Blake had every advantage imaginable. Yet despite this privilege, or perhaps because of it, he harbored a deep resentment. He lived constantly in the shadow of his older brother, Cody, who seemed to effortlessly win their father's approval and attention. When his parents separated, the division was telling. Cody lived with their father in the city's most prestigious area, while Blake was relegated to what many considered only the second most expensive neighborhood. After his mother's death in 2011, Blake inherited approximately $6 million. Rather than find purpose or meaning, he used this windfall to fund his Hollywood dreams, moving to Los Angeles in 2004 with unlimited financial backing. In Hollywood, Blake dabbled in entertainment projects, minor work on the animated Spaceball series, and various small productions. But his most revealing project was a graphic novel called Syndrome, which he helped create in 2010. The story centered on a sadistic doctor studying a serial killer, featuring detailed depictions of victims being drained of blood and hung upside down. The novel's chilling conclusion read, "In the end, we all become monsters." Blake's personal relationships revealed a disturbing pattern. He married model Amanda Braun in 2006, but friends described a controlling dynamic where Blake used his wealth to manipulate and dominate. When Amanda became pregnant with their second child in 2015, Blake abruptly abandoned her, walking out just as she was about to give birth. By May 2016, Blake's carefully constructed life was crumbling. He had been arrested for sexually assaulting a third girlfriend. Constance Bucciafari and Iana had to bail him out, creating enormous tension in their relationship. He was juggling multiple women, multiple lies, and mounting legal pressures. Paranoid and increasingly unstable, Blake had convinced himself that Russian mobsters were threatening his family due to his brother's alleged gambling debts. This created the perfect storm. A narcissistic man losing control, facing legal consequences for the first time in his privileged life, and desperate to regain the power he believed was his birthright. As we go into the most chilling details of this documentary, take a brief moment to like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, for more in-depth investigations and analysis of significant cases like this. May 23, 2016, began like any other day for Iana Kasian. She spent the morning with her mother, Olga, shopping for baby strollers, a happy task for a new mother planning her daughter's future. They laughed, they planned, they dreamed. It would be the last normal day of Iana's life. That afternoon, as they browsed through stores, Iana's phone began buzzing with text messages from Blake. Olga watched in horror as her daughter's entire demeanor shifted upon reading them. She would change like a chameleon. Olga later testified that the confident, happy woman would instantly transform into someone fearful and anxious. Despite her mother's pleas to stay, Iana felt compelled to return to Blake's apartment. She kissed her 3-week-old daughter goodbye, leaving Diana with her grandmother as Blake had demanded. It was the last time Olga would see her daughter alive. May 24th brought an ominous silence. Throughout the day, Olga tried desperately to reach Iana. One call went unanswered, then two. By the 6th unanswered call, Olga's maternal instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong. This was completely unlike Iana, who called her mother every single day without fail. Behind the locked doors of the West Hollywood apartment, a nightmare was beginning. Evidence would later reveal that Blake's psychological torture escalated into physical violence that evening. Iana tried to call for help, but her attempts were cut short by her captor. What happened next would shock even seasoned homicide investigators. According to forensic analysis, Blake began systematically implementing the torture techniques he had detailed years earlier in his graphic novel Syndrome. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated execution of a plan he had fantasized about for years. The scalping process was designed specifically to keep Iana conscious and suffering. Blake used sharp instruments, possibly the green paring knife and bloodied razor blade that police would later find, to methodically remove portions of her scalp from the base of her skull. But this was only the beginning. As Iana fought desperately for her life, leaving defensive wounds throughout the apartment, Blake began the process of exsanguination, draining her blood while she remained alive. Dr. James Ribe, the Los Angeles County coroner, would later testify that in his decades of experience, he had never seen anything like this outside of wartime. The forensic evidence revealed the true horror of Jana's final hours. She had been bitten, beaten, and mutilated, yet somehow survived for at least 8 hours after receiving the initial scalp injury. The torture was calculated to maximize suffering, designed to keep her alive and conscious for as long as possible. Perhaps most chilling of all was Blake's casual behavior during this prolonged torture session. Security footage and delivery records show that he ordered food from Postmates multiple times while Iana was dying, specifically instructing drivers not to knock, but to leave the food outside. He didn't want to be interrupted. After Iana finally succumbed to her injuries, Blake embarked on a methodical cover-up. He spent hours cleaning blood evidence throughout the apartment, disposing of 11 trash bags filled with bloody sheets, towels, clothing, and pieces of Iana's body down the building's garbage chute. Forensic specialists would later use Blue Star technology to reveal the true extent of the violence. Under the specialized lighting, the apartment lit up like a Christmas tree, revealing blood evidence in every room: the kitchen, bathroom, guest bedroom, and hallway. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a bed skirt bearing Blake's distinctive handprint. easily identifiable because he was missing part of his right pinky finger. Blake also prepared for his escape. Packing his passport and $4,000 in cash, he positioned Iana's body carefully on the bed, covering her mutilated form with a red Mickey Mouse blanket, and cleaned her corpse to remove obvious signs of violence. Meanwhile, Olga's panic was reaching a breaking point. By May 25th, she could no longer bear the silence. Despite the language barrier and her responsibility for baby Diana, she made the desperate decision to go to Blake's apartment herself. Surveillance footage captures the moment another resident opened the building's security gate and Olga ran through, racing to the third floor. Standing on the street below, she screamed, "Blake, Blake!" At the apartment window, witnesses saw a figure approach the window, then quickly close it and disappear. When the first police officers arrived for a welfare check, they knocked on the door but left when no one answered. There was no clear indication of distress, and without probable cause, they couldn't force entry. Blake was inside with Iana's body, but he remained silent. Olga's desperation intensified overnight. On May 26th, she returned with a translator and demanded police action. Her 911 call was heartbreaking. "Help, help me. I want the police to free my daughter." This time, police agreed to conduct a welfare check, partly due to concerns about Iana's recent childbirth. When they arrived at the apartment, they discovered it was secured from the inside with hotel-style locks, clear evidence that someone was home. Officers called out repeatedly, "Sheriff's Department, Blake, Iana." When no one responded, they made the decision to breach the door. They found the apartment's interior doors locked and barricaded with mattresses. As police forced their way through each barrier, they began finding blood evidence. First in the guest bedroom, then leading toward the master bedroom, which was also barricaded. From behind that final door, Blake finally spoke, telling officers that Iana wasn't home, a lie that would become part of the evidence against him. Blake called his friend and accountant, Stephen Green, for help. Security footage shows Green racing through the lobby and up to the apartment. It was Green who finally convinced Blake to open the bedroom door and surrender. When officers entered the master bedroom, they found Blake wearing only boxer shorts, lying calmly beside Iana's covered body. The Mickey Mouse blanket concealed the true horror of what he had done. Blake had scratches and bruises on his face and a bite mark on his arm, evidence of Iana's desperate fight for survival. Blake's demeanor was eerily calm. When questioned about the scene, he simply said, "Science will tell you who did this," a statement that would prove prophetic, as the scientific evidence would indeed reveal his guilt beyond any doubt. As police led Blake away in handcuffs, Olga arrived at the building. She saw her daughter's killer being arrested, but her focus was entirely on the apartment door. She kept looking, waiting, hoping that somehow Iana would emerge alive. It was in that hallway that Detective Rob Martindale had to deliver the devastating news. Iana was dead. Olga's screams of, "Where is my daughter?" echoed through the building as she tried desperately to crawl toward the apartment where her daughter's body lay. The crime that would be called unprecedented outside of wartime was over, but its impact was just beginning. The science that Blake Leibel had so confidently claimed would exonerate him would instead seal his fate. Crime scene specialist Leslie Thompson arrived at the apartment with equipment that would reveal the true horror of what had occurred within those walls. Using a chemical compound called Blue Star, an advanced version of luminol, Thompson sprayed the apartment's surfaces. When the lights went out, the truth blazed forth in an eerie blue glow. The apartment, as investigators described it, lit up like a Christmas tree. Blood evidence appeared everywhere: the kitchen, the bathroom, both bedrooms, and the hallway. Footprints glowed on the floor, showing Blake's movements as he tracked Iana's blood throughout the apartment. Wiping patterns revealed his desperate attempts to clean the evidence. Even areas that appeared spotless to the naked eye revealed the massive scope of violence. Investigators recovered 11 trash bags containing the missing pieces of the puzzle: bloody bedding, towels, clothing, and horrifyingly, pieces of Iana's scalp and hair. DNA analysis confirmed that all blood evidence belonged exclusively to Iana and Blake. There was no mysterious third party, no alternative explanation for the carnage. But perhaps the most chilling evidence was hiding in plain sight. Years before he met Iana, Blake had co-created a graphic novel called Syndrome. The cover depicted a baby doll with its scalp partially removed. Inside, detailed illustrations showed victims hanging upside down while their blood was drained from their bodies. The parallels were undeniable. The prosecution argued that Syndrome had served as Blake's blueprint for murder, and the evidence supported this terrifying theory. The novel's methodology matched the crime scene exactly: scalping designed to keep victims conscious, systematic blood drainage, and prolonged torture. The graphic novel's final line, "In the end, we all become monsters," had proven prophetic. This wasn't a sudden explosion of violence. It was the culmination of years of fantasy rehearsal. Blake had mentally practiced this murder countless times through his artistic work, perfecting his techniques on fictional victims before applying them to the woman he claimed to love. In June 2018, 2 years after Iana's murder, Blake Leibel faced trial on charges of first-degree murder, torture, and aggravated mayhem. The prosecution presented overwhelming forensic evidence: the DNA, the blood patterns, the graphic novel, and the defendant's own behavior. Blake's defense team could offer no alternative theory, no credible explanation for the evidence. Their client, photographed smiling oddly in his arrest mugshot, seemed to embody the callous evil he was accused of. Throughout the trial, only his brother Cody attended to support him. The rest of his wealthy family remained conspicuously absent. The jury needed just 3 hours to reach their verdict: guilty on all counts. Blake Leibel would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the legal proceedings weren't over. In a civil wrongful death lawsuit, a judge awarded Iana's family $41,600,000 in damages. Blake refused to attend these proceedings, and tellingly, not a single member of the wealthy Leibel family appeared to accept responsibility or offer support. Despite their vast fortune, the Leibels completely abandoned any financial obligation to Diana, their own blood relative. The burden of raising Blake's daughter and explaining her father's unspeakable crimes fell entirely on Olga, a Ukrainian grandmother struggling to make ends meet. The justice system had recognized the unprecedented nature of Blake's cruelty. But money, it seemed, could still buy the ultimate privilege: the ability to walk away from consequences entirely. While Blake Leibel serves his life sentence in California's Sentinel Estate Prison, the real victims of his cruelty continue to suffer every single day. Olga, now in her 60s, has become the sole guardian of 3-year-old Diana in Ukraine. Far from the American dream that Iana had envisioned for her daughter, every morning Olga wakes up to care for the child who carries the DNA of both her beloved daughter and the monster who destroyed their family. The $41,600,000 civil judgment remains largely symbolic. Despite the Leibel family's vast wealth, estimated in the hundreds of millions, they have paid nothing toward Diana's care. Olga struggles financially to provide for her granddaughter while dealing with her own trauma and grief. Immigration complications prevent her from returning to the United States, trapping her in a cycle of poverty that wealth could easily solve. The psychological burden is immense. Olga lives with constant reminders of Iana's final hours of terror, yet she must somehow find the strength to raise Diana with love and stability. She keeps photos of Iana throughout their small home, determined that Diana will know her mother's story, though she dreads the day she must explain how that story ended. Diana herself represents one of this case's most heartbreaking elements. She is growing up in Ukraine rather than America, denied not only her mother's presence but also the opportunity Iana died trying to secure for her. The wealthy Leibel family, who could easily provide for their own blood relative, have chosen complete abandonment. Diana will someday learn that her father's family possessed the means to transform her life, but simply chose not to care. This case has left lasting impacts beyond the immediate victims. Dr. James Ribe's assessment that this was the most extreme torture case he'd seen outside of wartime has become a benchmark for forensic pathologists. The case has sparked new discussions about how fictional violence can become a real-world blueprint, raising questions about warning signs in creative works. Law enforcement protocols have been enhanced for domestic violence cases involving recent mothers, recognizing the particular vulnerability of women in Iana's situation. Immigration advocates have pointed to this case as an example of how documentation status can trap victims in abusive relationships. Perhaps most troubling are the broader cultural questions this case raises. Blake Leibel's story demonstrates how extreme wealth can hide and enable psychopathic behavior for decades. His privileged background, attractive appearance, and generous spending created a perfect disguise for his true nature. The case also highlights the dangerous vulnerability of immigrants seeking the American dream and how easily they can be exploited by those who view their desperation as opportunity. Most damning of all is the Leibel family's response, or lack thereof. Their complete abandonment of Diana reveals how wealth can purchase not just comfort and opportunity, but also the ultimate privilege, the ability to walk away from moral responsibility entirely. Iana Kasian was more than the horrific circumstances of her death. She was a prosecutor who fought corruption, an immigrant who mastered new languages and cultures, and a mother who dreamed of giving her daughter opportunities she never had. Her 3 weeks of motherhood were stolen by a man who saw her strength as something to destroy rather than celebrate. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. How many warning signs were dismissed because Blake's wealth made him seem like a catch rather than a threat? How do we protect vulnerable people from predators who wear privilege as a disguise? The answers begin with recognition, understanding that isolation and control are abuse. Regardless of how much money cushions the cage, we must remember that evil doesn't always look like our worst fears. Sometimes, it looks like everything we're taught to want. Iana Kasian deserved to see her daughter grow up in the America she believed in. That dream died with her, but her story lives on as a warning we cannot afford to ignore. If you enjoyed this content, join our community by subscribing and turning on notifications. Every subscriber makes it possible for us to keep creating content we're passionate about sharing with you.